Hey folks, this is Rhykker with a gaming news wrap-up video where we discuss the happenings of the week. Feel free to check out last week's episode and ensure you have subscription notifications turned on to be alerted of new episodes. We'll start with some general gaming news before finishing off with Diablo and Overwatch, so feel free to reference the timestamps to skip ahead. And the first story we'll touch upon here is an update to our Destiny 2 story from last week. If you're unaware, the first Destiny 2 expansion recently released, and something that caused a lot of controversy is that if you did not buy the expansion, you were locked out of certain endgame content that you could previously do. In other words, the full product that you paid for, the base Destiny 2 game, was suddenly having parts taken away from you if you didn't also buy the latest expansion. Now, some people replied to this by saying, well, they did the same thing with Destiny 1, so it's your own fault if you didn't see this coming. And I think that's an absurd statement. Consumers should not have to conduct a historical research thesis on a game and a developer and a publisher before buying a game. What's promised on the box, what's promised in the delivered product, should be what you get, what you pay for. It's not the consumer's fault if there's false advertising or shoddy business practices going on. But the story does have a happy ending. The developers of Destiny 2 heard the cries of injustice loud and clear, and they changed the system such that if you do not buy the expansion, you still have all the same content still available to you. Now, this may seem like a small victory in the grand scheme of things, but it's an important victory. Every small victory is an important victory because it shows that we have a voice. This past month has done a lot to show us that as consumers, as gamers, we could make noise and effectuate change. We don't have to accept the status quo. We don't have to accept the increasingly shoddy business practices that the industry has been shoveling on us over the years. Our voices matter. Moving on to our next story, Battlefield Bad Company 3 has been leaked by YouTuber Almighty Dak. And what lends this leak legitimacy is that Almighty Dak is the same person who leaked Battlefield 1 back in March 2016, and he turned out to be exactly correct. I'll have a link in the description to Almighty Dak's video where he covers all the details, but some short bullet points here are that EA and DICE's Battlefield Bad Company 3 will be set in the mid and post-Vietnam conflict and in some of the Cold War era, which is a bit of an anachronism, but it's a video game. There'll be no microtransactions like Star Wars Battlefront 2. There might be battle packs like in Battlefield 4, but even those may be scrapped due to the current controversy around Battlefront 2. Dak says the game will be announced and revealed at E3, but not necessarily this year's E3, because it also won't necessarily be the very next Battlefield game to be released. What are your thoughts? Do you think this leak is legit? And do you like the sound of how this Battlefield is shaping up? On to our next story. Some of the original developers of Fallout are coming together to create a new RPG. Specifically, Tim Kaine and Leonard Boyarsky, who both worked on Fallout 1 and Fallout 2, will be working on this project, and Leonard Boyarsky was also the lead world designer of Diablo 3. So it would certainly be interesting to follow what comes of this game. On to our next story about Death Stranding. We spoke a bit about Death Stranding in last week's video. Death Stranding is that mind freak action game being developed by Hideo Kojima. It had that weird trailer with the Lovecraftian horrors and the creepy babies, and was more confusing than the plot of Lost. It had fans speculating on so many things and coming up with so many theories. Well, we finally gotten some answers, or at least some more information. In an interview with IGN, and I'll provide a link in the description to the full thing, Kojima dropped a couple details on lore and game mechanics, and it's sounding like Death Stranding will have a very cool and unique death mechanic. When you die, rather than just reload at the last checkpoint, you actually enter some form of purgatory, during which time you could wander around, explore, and even apparently pick up items. Kojima compares it to the equivalent of a continue screen, ticking down towards 0 before you decide to re-enter the realm of the living. And when you do return to the land of the living, it's not a rewind button. If whatever killed you resulted in some effect or impact on the world, that will still be there. So if you're killed in an explosion that results in a big crater, that crater will still be there. To quote Kojima, "Death will never pull you out of the game." That sounds like a really interesting mechanic, and I look forward to seeing how it plays out. Kojima also dropped a lore tidbit. In the trailer, you see a type of rain coming down. That rain is called timefall, and basically anything it hits will age within seconds. So plants are going to grow and wilt immediately. If it lands on a human, they're going to age and become the Crypt Keeper within moments. And this timefall is apparently integral to the game's story and lore. On to our next story. This one's about Square Enix, and it's in reply to the whole microtransactions microtransaction controversy. In an interview with MCV, again I'll link the source below, Square Enix CEO Yosuke Matsuda basically expressed that he doesn't feel that microtransactions belong in AAA games. Quote, "The way that console games are made, the volume of content, and how much effort goes into them, there's something in that which doesn't fit in the mind with microtransactions." Now, this is a powerful statement to make, and it's something that can really win over the hearts and minds of gamers, but it doesn't take too much digging to begin to question his statement. Both Rise of the Tomb Raider and Deus Ex Mankind Divided did have microtransactions. These microtransactions were ultimately not very impactful on the game, they weren't pay to win, but they nonetheless did exist. That leads us to question whether Matsuda was speaking perhaps more on behalf of the Japanese division of Square Enix, but overall it does somewhat weaken his statement. But what do you folks think? Alright, now before we get into Diablo and Overwatch, we're just gonna quickly talk about net neutrality. This week, the vote passed. America lost net neutrality. I briefly spoke about net neutrality in the past before the vote. I did not do the topic justice. I just wanted to quickly squeeze in the importance of trying to preserve net neutrality, and in doing so I did not give fair journalistic coverage to the arguments in favor of losing net neutrality. Because while a lot of us are on the same side in this matter, there are cogent arguments to be made in opposition of preserving net neutrality. And the first argument here will sum up as, why should I pay for something that I don't need or use? Let's consider the case of myself and my neighbor. We each pay $50 a month for internet. All I do is play games, but my neighbor streams a ton of Netflix, which uses up so much more bandwidth. If my internet package could be parceled out in such a way that I could just buy the gaming package, and I wouldn't have to buy the messaging package, the music package, the video package, then overall I can probably save money and I'll be paying less than $50 a month. The logic of that argument is fair, but my question is, would you really be paying less? Would the average person really be paying less? Will internet service providers change the system such that they're making less money? They're either going to try to maintain the same amount of money, or more likely, being a business, they'll take the opportunity to try to earn more money. And so yes, there will be some people that will be able to pay less than they are currently paying for their internet, but more people will likely end up paying more. So if you feel you might be one of those few people who will save money, then yes, I can see an argument in favor of losing net neutrality. Another argument is that some people would happily pay an extra $5 a month so that, for instance, Netflix doesn't count towards their monthly data cap. If 95% of your monthly bandwidth is being taken up by Netflix, then it's probably going to be cheaper to just pay another $5 to have Netflix not count towards your cap than to pay another $20 a month, for argument's sake, to increase your monthly bandwidth limit. Yes, I can definitely see this being a good thing for the consumer. But consider the long-term repercussions on competition. How could a startup ever compete with Netflix when people are able to make Netflix not count towards their data cap, and a small company won't be able to do that? Netflix will basically never have to worry about a competitor and can thus afford to raise prices. Another argument is that the internet did fine before 2015. Which is when the US government ruled in favor of net neutrality. So first off, let's just assume that this is true. Can you really compare the internet of today to the internet of 20 years ago, of even 10 years ago? How many people in the 90s had consistent, high-speed internet connections? How many people in the 2000s? It was really only in the 2010s, and even in more recent history, that we're getting to an era where internet usage is becoming ubiquitous. You have these days literal homeless people who have old smartphone devices that will connect to a McDonald's Wi-Fi, because our society is moving to one where there's an expectation that you have internet access in order to check job postings, in order to respond to emails. It's becoming increasingly difficult to get by in this world without a reliable internet connection. Over time, the internet has been moving from being a luxury to a commodity. So I don't think it's fair to really compare to the old internet, to how the internet evolved. But now I want to question the very statement that the internet did fine before 2015. In 2005, Comcast blocked and slowed BitTorrent traffic to make it more difficult for you to totally legally acquire music and movies and games over the internet. From 2007 to 2009, AT&T blocked Skype from making calls because AT&T wanted AT&T customers using AT&T's calling services, not Skype's. And in 2012, they blocked FaceTime for the same reason, to kill competition. In 2009, Google Voice had to deal with similar issues with multiple ISPs. From 2011 to 2013, AT&T, T-Mobile, and Verizon together all blocked Google Wallet to get users to use a rival payment system called ISIS. Yes, it's literally called ISIS. Why? Because all three of those companies had shares in ISIS. It is 100% factual to say that AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile supported ISIS. In 2012, Verizon blocked users from using tethering apps on their phones that bypassed Verizon's $20 tethering fee. An example of tethering is when you want to use your phone as a mobile hotspot. In 2014, Netflix started paying Comcast so that customers would have faster speeds when streaming Netflix, something that a new company that would want to compete with Netflix would not be able to afford to do. So here's the bottom line. Given all this, given their track record, do you trust these internet service providers to act with your best interests at heart? Do you trust to leave with them the control to determine what parts of the internet are and are not easily accessible to you? At what speeds? At what prices? And that really is the determining question. Who do you trust more to oversee your best interests? Internet service providers or the US government? And that's the final point in favor of getting rid of net neutrality. A lot of people want less government regulation, and that's a point that I can't argue against. And the question that I just posed is not an easy one to answer. Do you trust more the US government or ISPs? At the end of the day, we don't know what's going to happen now that net neutrality has been repealed. But when I see repeated attempts of the big names in the industry attempting to squash competition rather than try to compete by delivering a better product, I don't think that bodes well. But what do you think? On to Diablo news. I already covered the big Diablo news in a video this week. I encourage you to check out that video, but basically a financial analyst is claiming that he believes Diablo 4 will release in 2019, and in our video we examine how plausible that is. Do go check that out if you haven't. The Diablo anniversary event is coming up in January. This is that fun little activity where you get to sort of replay through Diablo 1 in a retro filter, and we have semi-confirmation from community manager Nevelistus that there likely won't be any changes to the event this year. Nonetheless, I know there are a lot of you who haven't had a chance to check it out last year, so you'll be able to do that this year. Next in Diablo, I wanted to touch upon a topic brought up by Reddit user czepta, and he pointed out that in the original design document for Diablo, it seemed like there was some intent to produce what amounts to loot boxes. The design document refers to them as expansion packs, and the document describes these as discs that would contain new elements that are directly installable into the base Diablo game. These elements would include new magic items, new creatures, new traps, and new level graphics. Expansion discs would all be different, or maybe 16 or 32 combinations, and would contain approximately 60 new elements in varying degrees of rarity. A sample disc might contain 1 rare sword, 3 uncommon magic items, 8 common items, 2 creatures, 1 trap, and a new hallway type. A player would buy a new expansion disc or 2, go home and install the new data into his game. The new elements would be incorporated into the random mix when a new level is generated. The document goes on to compare these to Magic the Gathering card packs and suggests a price of about $5. Now obviously this never made it into the final product, but the question that I would like to turn to you folks is, would this have been acceptable in your mind? Now some points to consider here is that this would have been back in 1994. Internet access was fairly limited. This was an era in which we didn't have DLC. There was no downloadable content. You didn't have ubiquitous game patches that you can easily download. The content that's being described here, today we would get in a free update in Diablo 3, for instance. But back in 1994, there was no easy way to get that content out to people. And if you're gonna print things on CD, that costs you money. Personally, I'm of the mind that I'm cool with paying for additional content, but what I don't like is the randomized nature that I don't know exactly what I'm paying for and I have to buy multiple discs to collect them all. It's another reason that I don't like Magic the Gathering and similar games. But what do you folks think? And lastly, for Diablo, I just wanted to mention that I did not get a chance to put up part 2 of the lore series this week. It was a pretty big news week, but I'm hoping to get that done next week. On to Overwatch news. The latest patch released this week. With it came the Winter Wonderland event. Also with this patch though came a highly desired quality of life change. In the hero gallery, you can now click mark all as seen to make all of those new item notifications just go away. Overwatch is now playable. Another nice change is that when you report someone now, if your report results in action taken against that player, you'll be notified. So you get that feedback that makes you realize, yes, reporting does do something. It does make a difference. We also see some quality of life changes that make Doomfist more playable, and Moira can now pass through enemies while using Fade. Season 8 in Overwatch competitive mode will be coming up, and we're looking at some changes that will be made to competitive. For Diamond rank players and above, your personal performance in a game will no longer impact skill rating adjustments. Basically, right now, for all players regardless of skill, if your team loses but you personally did really well, you won't lose as much SR. Moving into Season 8, this will no longer hold true for Diamond and above players. What this means is that it's more important that your team wins than your personal performance. And what's really good about this is that it removes the element of stat padding that we could otherwise see happen. The current system, while it has benefits, also has drawbacks in that if, for instance, you change character to adapt to the situation, that tends to hurt your performance because it's ranking you against other players that played a similar character, and it just kind of futzes with things and makes it seem like you didn't perform as well. It also means that with any given character you play, you don't have to attempt to either get more kills or do more healing just for the purposes of inflating your numbers for the SR. This is largely being seen as a positive thing, and it seems the only complaint really is that this isn't also happening for lower level players. But then the counter to that would be, well, then if I'm in a team with bad players, it doesn't matter how good I play. If I'm not a carry hero, then we're not going to win and I'm going to lose SR. At least this way, if I'm a good player with a bad team, which is of course what everyone thinks, I at least won't lose as much SR. But what are your thoughts on this? In other Overwatch news, it seems that Tracer is making a cameo in the movie Ready Player One. We briefly see her as well as Chun-Li and Lara Croft in the trailer that was revealed recently. Now, Ready Player One was originally a 2011 sci-fi novel set in a dystopian 2044 future. It largely revolves around living in a virtual reality world, and it's chock full of pop culture references, in the novel specifically about the 80s, but it seems a movie, which is being directed by Steven Spielberg, is taking a more general pop culture approach. The film is set to release March 30th, 2018. And we'll finish off Overwatch news by talking about skins, the first being the great casual Hanzo skin controversy. With the winter event, we got this Hanzo skin, and it seems the public reaction to it is pretty poor. That also was my reaction to it. I wasn't crazy about it, particularly considering what it could have looked like. People have gone so far as to complain that even the portrait seems unfinished. Well, Reddit user Chatty Window has modified the skin, did a mock-up in Photoshop to show how it could be fixed, and it's definitely an improvement. But what do you think? Do you hate the new Hanzo skin? On to some fan skins here. We've got this Frosty Symmetra skin by Twitter user Fairy Fountain. We have this Urbosa Zarya skin from Antonio D'Amico. We've got this Scrap Hard Reinhardt skin by Princess Sky Owl. And then we have this ridiculously gorgeously well-made Diva skin by Gregory Labidko. And the amount of effort put into this and how realistic it looks, I would believe this is an honest-to-goodness skin made by Blizzard. And that's gonna wrap up our video for the week. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my Twitch and Patreon supporters for making these videos possible. If you'd like to help support me through the YouTube adpocalypse and make me a little less reliant on ad revenue, then we've got a bunch of backer rewards on Patreon. All support is immensely appreciated. If you enjoyed this video, please consider sharing it, check out these other videos, and subscribe to join Rhykkers Raiders for more gaming content.